Hello all, and welcome to the third episode of the Bastard Review. This week I'm looking at Summerslam 1999. The 12th annual event saw 17,370 people pack into the Target Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota on August 22nd, 1999. SummerSlam is known as one of the big four WWE pay-per-views, the others being Royal Rumble, Survivor Series, and the one that started it all, WrestleMania. The night started with Jesse the Body Ventura talking to Triple H in China about the main event, which had Jesse as the guest referee. Jesse warned them not to try any funny stuff, but Hunter said he'd do as he pleased in the ring. Next came a promo with Chris Jericho belittling Howard Finkel, a referee and at the time Jericho's flunky, for being late. The first match of the night was between Jeff Jarrett and D'Lo Brown, who was both Intercontinental Champion and European Champion. Both titles were on the line, but this wasn't a unification match. Deborah originally came down with Jarrett, but after sending her backstage, she decided to upset Jeff by accompanying D'Lo to the ring. The general storyline is that Jarrett lost the Intercontinental title to D'Lo on the previous episode of Raw, where both titles were on the line, and this was the rematch. To add insult to injury, Jarrett had just won the title a mere day before at Fully Loaded. My only criticism is that having two belts on one person is a bit of overkill. You're tying up two belts when you could be building up another wrestler with one of them. Regardless, this was a good match, there was a decent story behind it, and the end had a nice swerve where Mark Henry comes down in the guise of helping D'Lo, but turns on him and costs D'Lo both titles. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. Michael Cole interviews Edge and Christian about the match they're involved in, Tag Team Turmoil, with the winners gaining a number one contender spot. The general premise is that two teams square off, and after one wins, another team comes down until all 5 teams have been eliminated and the final team remains. The other teams included the Hardy Boys, who at the time were known as the New Brood with Gangrel, Midian and Viscera, Droz and Prince Albert, the Acolytes, which were made up of Farouk and Bradshaw, and Hardcore and Crash Holly, who I believe were supposed to be brothers. A funny little note, half of these teams were once part of Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness. While this started off good with Edge and Christian facing the Hardys, after Edge and Christian lost to the Acolytes, it just wasn't as interesting. If the Acolytes had to win, I think they should have been the last team to face Edge and Christian. With them pinning Edge and Christian, the momentum of the match was just lost. Things were getting better for the tag teams in the WWF at the time, with the Hardys, Edge and Christian, the Acolytes, but the titles really suffered because the teams that were winning were still single guys thrown together, and the titles were changing hands way too frequently. In the month of August alone, they had changed hands 3 times. This was a decent match, but it could have been vastly better. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Al Snow cuts a promo talking to his chihuahua, Pepper, and then Road Dogg comes down to the ring talking about winning back the Hardcore title, despite not having it around his waist since December of '98, but gets interrupted by Chris Jericho, who cuts his own promo. It's strange that Jericho makes an appearance here because aside from facing each other on the next SmackDown, Jericho and Road Dogg don't meet again for another 2 months. Road Dogg eventually sits down at the announcer's table to guest announce the Hardcore title match between Al Snow and Big Boss Man. During the match, both men go backstage and Road Dogg follows to announce play-by-play as it happens. They make their way around the arena and find themselves out in the street and then in a local bar. This was pretty much a lame match, despite the win from Al Snow, particularly because he loses it again 4 days later on the next episode of SmackDown. It's nice to see Stevie Richards and the Blue Meanie at the end of the match, though, when Al goes to retrieve Pepper and beats them down. I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. After that, Jesse Ventura talks to Mankind, and they discuss Geraldine Ferrero. How fun. The next match is for the women's title between Ivory and Tori. I really like Ivory as a wrestler, and I would love to see her still around today. This was a nice little match, and Tori managed to pull off some impressive moves to my pleasant surprise. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Michael Cole must get around because he interviews The Rock, but The Rock turns the tables on him and interviews Cole instead. Billy Gunn is shown escorting someone under a blanket into the backstage arena. A promo about the feud between Steve Blackman and Ken Shamrock is featured. Then it's time for them to face in a Lion's Den weapons match. Think MMA cage with weapons around it. Is this a Mad Max movie set? I really had no interest here, and I've told you in episode 1 my thoughts on both men. But I have to say this was an amusing match. Good for a few laughs, I'm giving this a 3 out of 10. Kevin Kelly talks about Test getting attacked by Shane McMahon earlier in the evening on Sunday Night Heat. Then it's Test versus Shane in a love her or leave her Greenwich street fight. This match centers around Test courting Shane's sister, Stephanie. The result of the match stated that if Test lost, he'd end his relationship with her, but if he won, Shane would step away and no longer involve himself in their blossoming love. Isn't that romantic? The Mean Street Posse, Shane's friends, make an appearance and manage to get their licks in against Test after he beat them down a few weeks prior on Raw. This match at its heart is just another hardcore match, and after 2 similar matches already, this really feels like overkill. I realize that Shane isn't a wrestler, but if you're going to book him in a match, he's gonna have to learn, isn't he? Regardless, after seeing him dive off the top ropes with an elbow drop on the Test on the Spanish announcer's table was insane and great to see. Here's a question. Why is the referee counting in a street fight? Neither men can be disqualified. Later in the match, Gerald Briscoe and Pat Patterson attack the posse, and one has to wonder if they're secretly acting on Vince's behalf. This was an okay match, it had an okay story behind it, but ultimately it was about the McMahons, and it didn't interest me. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Please tune in for part 2 when I continue to review SummerSlam 1999.